I was always seen as the disappointing daughter, while my sister was the golden child. The truth about her came to light at my wedding. Growing up in our suburban house with the perfectly manicured lawn and white picket fence, I learned early that love came with conditions. My parents had this unspoken hierarchy where my older sister occupied the throne and I existed somewhere in the shadows, collecting scraps of attention when she wasn't around to claim them. She was everything they wanted in a daughter. Perfect grades without trying, captain of 3 different sports teams, homecoming queen, full scholarship to an Ivy League school. Meanwhile, I struggled with dyslexia that went undiagnosed for years because they were too busy celebrating her achievements to notice my difficulties. When I brought home B's and C's, they'd shake their heads and wonder aloud why I couldn't be more like her. When she brought home A's, they'd frame her report cards and hang them on the refrigerator like trophies. The comparison was constant and suffocating. At family dinners, conversations revolved around her latest accomplishment or upcoming event. I'd sit there pushing food around my plate, feeling invisible even when I was right there at the table. If I tried to share something from my day, they'd listen with half an ear before inevitably steering the conversation back to her. Christmas mornings were particularly brutal. The pile of gifts under the tree would be divided unequally, with expensive electronics and designer clothes flowing her way while I unwrapped practical items like socks and school supplies. They'd justify it by saying she deserved nice things because she worked so hard, as if my efforts meant nothing. High school was when the resentment really started to build. While she glided through her senior year accepting college acceptance letters and scholarship offers, I was struggling to maintain my grades and figure out what I even wanted to do with my life. My guidance counselor suggested community college, which my parents greeted with disappointed sighs and comments about how at least one of their daughters would make something of herself. The breaking point came during my graduation ceremony. After 4 years of fighting through learning difficulties and working twice as hard as my classmates just to keep up, I walked across that stage feeling proud of what I'd accomplished. But when I looked out into the audience, my parents were on their phones, probably texting her about some new internship opportunity. They missed my name being called. They missed the moment I'd worked so hard for. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following their plan for me to attend the local community college and live at home, I took out student loans and enrolled at a state school 3 hours away. They were furious, calling it irresponsible and wasteful, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. College was my liberation. Away from the constant comparisons and disappointed looks, I discovered who I was without her shadow looming over me. I changed my major 3 times before settling on something that felt right, made friends who valued me for who I was, and slowly started believing in myself. My grades improved dramatically once I was in an environment where I could thrive. During my sophomore year, I met him at a campus coffee shop where we both worked part-time jobs. He was studying engineering, had this quiet confidence that drew me in, and most importantly, he knew nothing about my family dynamics. To him, I wasn't the disappointing daughter or the lesser sister. I was just me, and that was enough. Our relationship developed slowly over shared shifts and late-night study sessions. He had this way of listening when I talked, really listening, that made me feel heard for the first time in years. When I told him about my family situation, he was shocked by how they treated me. Having grown up in a household where both children were equally celebrated, he couldn't understand parents who played favorites so blatantly. We dated for 3 years before he proposed, and when he did, it was perfect in its simplicity. No grand gestures or public displays, just the two of us on a hiking trail we discovered together, with him getting down on one knee and asking if I wanted to build a life together. I said yes before he finished the question. Planning the wedding was when things got complicated. My parents insisted on being involved, which meant endless phone calls about guest lists and seating arrangements. They wanted to invite their entire social circle, people who'd watched me grow up in my sister's shadow and probably expected little from me. The whole process became less about celebrating our union and more about managing their expectations and keeping the peace. My sister had graduated by then and was living in New York, working at some prestigious firm that my parents brought up in every conversation. She was dating someone they approved of, another high achiever who fit perfectly into their vision of success. When wedding planning began, they immediately started comparing my modest celebration to the elaborate affair they were already envisioning for her future wedding. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with subtle digs and backhanded compliments. They'd make comments about how nice it was that I was settling down early, implying that marriage was my consolation prize for not achieving more professionally. They questioned our budget, our venue choice, our decision to have a small ceremony instead of a massive production. 3 weeks before the wedding, something strange happened. My sister called me out of the blue, which was unusual since we rarely spoke directly. She said she needed to tell me something important before the wedding, something that had been weighing on her for years. Her voice had this shaky quality I'd never heard before, and she kept starting sentences without finishing them. She asked if we could meet in person, said it was too important for a phone conversation. I was curious but also suspicious. Throughout our childhood, her rare gestures of sisterly bonding usually came with ulterior motives. But something in her tone made me agree to meet her at a neutral location, a park halfway between where we both lived. When I saw her sitting on the bench waiting for me, she looked different. The confident posture and perfect composure I remembered were gone, replaced by hunched shoulders and nervous fidgeting. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and when she hugged me hello, I could feel her trembling. What she told me that afternoon shattered everything I thought I knew about our family and explained years of confusion and hurt. She started by apologizing for never defending me, never standing up to our parents when they treated me unfairly. Then she took a deep breath and told me the truth that had been hidden for over 2 decades. She wasn't their biological daughter. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that had just exploded. She explained that our mother had been pregnant with her before marrying our father, the result of a relationship with someone else that ended badly. Our father had chosen to raise her as his own, but the knowledge of her paternity had always created this complex dynamic where they overcompensated by making her the perfect child. They poured all their energy into making her succeed because they felt guilty about the circumstances of her birth and wanted to prove that their blended family was better than traditional ones. Meanwhile, I represented their real child, the one who was supposed to succeed naturally without effort, and when I struggled, they saw it as a reflection of their own failings. She told me about the pressure she'd lived under, the constant fear that if she ever disappointed them, they might withdraw their love and support. Every achievement was driven by terror rather than genuine ambition. She'd been living with anxiety and panic attacks for years, afraid to seek help because it would shatter the perfect image everyone had of her. The revelation explained so much about our childhood dynamics, but it also raised new questions. Why tell me now? Why carry this secret for so long? She said she couldn't watch me get married while still believing the lies our parents had constructed about our family. She wanted me to know that their treatment of me had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with their own guilt and confusion about how to be parents to two very different children. But there was more. She'd been struggling at work, making mistakes that were completely out of character for her. The pressure to maintain perfection in every aspect of her life was finally catching up with her. She'd been seeing someone, not the approved boyfriend our parents knew about, but someone from her office who was married. The relationship was messy and destructive, and she was using it as a way to sabotage the perfect life she'd been trapped in. She wanted to come clean to our parents before the wedding, to finally tell them she knew the truth about her parentage and that she was tired of living up to impossible expectations. But she was terrified of their reaction and wanted my support before taking that step. I left that meeting feeling like my entire understanding of my family had been turned upside down. The sister I'd resented for so long was as much a victim of our parents' dysfunction as I was, just in a different way. The golden child pedestal I'd envied was actually a prison that had trapped her in a life she never chose. The week before the wedding, she followed through on her promise to confront our parents. I wasn't there for the conversation, but she called me afterward, crying harder than I'd ever heard her cry. They'd been furious that she knew the truth, accused her of being ungrateful for everything they'd given her, and threatened to cut her off financially if she didn't get her life together. The conversation had spiraled into a massive fight where years of suppressed resentment came pouring out from all sides. She told them about the pressure she'd been under, the anxiety, the destructive relationship, and how their favoritism had damaged both of us. They responded by doubling down on their disappointment, saying she was throwing away everything they'd worked to build for her. By the time my wedding day arrived, the family dynamic had completely imploded. My parents showed up looking strained and exhausted, putting on fake smiles for the guests while shooting angry glances at my sister. She attended the ceremony but looked like she might fall apart at any moment. But something beautiful happened during the reception. Away from our parents' watchful eyes, my sister and I found ourselves talking more honestly than we ever had. She told me how proud she was of me for building a life on my own terms, for finding someone who loved me unconditionally, for not letting their treatment break my spirit. I told her I was sorry for resenting her all those years, that I finally understood she'd been trapped in an impossible situation. For the first time in our lives, we connected as sisters rather than rivals. We laughed about shared memories I'd forgotten, commiserated about our parents' ridiculous expectations, and made plans to support each other going forward. The golden child and the disappointment finally saw each other as real people with real struggles. The most unexpected moment came during the traditional parent dances. When it was time for the father-daughter dance, our father approached me with tears in his eyes. As we moved slowly around the dance floor, he whispered an apology that caught me completely off guard. He said he'd been thinking about everything that had happened over the past week, and he realized how unfairly they'd treated me growing up. He explained that watching me plan this wedding, seeing how capable and independent I'd become, made him recognize that their constant comparisons had been wrong and harmful. He admitted they'd put too much pressure on my sister to be perfect and not enough faith in me to succeed on my own path. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was acknowledgement that meant more than any childhood approval ever could have. My mother's reaction was more complicated. She struggled to admit fault in how they'd raised us, but I could see the wheels turning in her head as she processed everything that had come to light. During the bouquet toss, she squeezed my hand and told me she was proud of the woman I'd become, even if she hadn't always shown it properly. The wedding ended up being exactly what I'd hoped for, despite all the family drama. My new husband and I were surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us, celebrating a love that had nothing to do with achievements or expectations. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention for positive reasons, and it felt incredible. In the months that followed, my sister made major changes to her life. She ended the destructive relationship, started seeing a counselor to deal with her anxiety, and eventually quit her high-pressure job to pursue something that actually interested her. Our parents struggled with her transformation, but gradually began to accept that their perfect daughter had been struggling in ways they never recognized. My relationship with my parents slowly improved as well. They made an effort to ask about my life without immediately comparing it to hers, and they started treating my husband with the respect he deserved. It wasn't a complete healing, but it was progress toward a healthier dynamic. The most significant change was in my relationship with my sister. We started talking regularly, supporting each other through the ongoing family adjustments and personal growth. She became someone I could confide in rather than compete with, and I think I provided her with the unconditional acceptance she'd never experienced growing up. Looking back now, I realize that wedding day marked the beginning of a new chapter for our entire family. The truth that came to light didn't fix everything immediately, but it created space for honest conversations and genuine relationships to develop. The golden child and the disappointment labels finally lost their power, replaced by something much more valuable: real sisterhood and mutual respect. My marriage has thrived in ways I never expected, partly because going through that family crisis together strengthened our bond and showed us we could handle difficult situations as a team. We've built a life based on our own values rather than anyone else's expectations, and that foundation has proven incredibly solid. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my sister had never found the courage to tell the truth. Would we have continued living in those assigned roles forever, never connecting as real people? Would I have spent my entire life feeling like I wasn't good enough while she struggled under impossible pressure? The wedding that was supposed to be just a celebration became a catalyst for transformation that none of us saw coming. In the end, the most important union that happened that day wasn't just between my husband and me, but between two sisters who finally found each other after years of being kept apart by secrets and expectations.